He kissed my cheek at the terminal. Quick, practiced, hollow. "First class, Ma, you'll love it," he said. His wife smiled beside him, all pearls and pretension. "You deserve a break." I thought it was kindness. It was choreography. At the counter, I handed my boarding pass to the attendant. She scanned it. Once, twice, then looked at me. That polite kind of pity people use when they're about to ruin your world gently. "Ma'am," she said, "this ticket isn't valid." The words hit harder than any slap. I blinked. "That's impossible. My son booked it himself." Her eyes softened. "Whoever booked this used a fake credit card." Fake, the kind of word that sticks in your throat. I stepped aside, heart steady but cold, because in that moment I realized this wasn't a mistake. This was an erasure. The calls he hadn't answered, the rushed, "Go enjoy yourself, Mom," the way his wife avoided my eyes that morning, it all aligned like cruel constellations. He hadn't sent me away to rest. He'd sent me away to disappear. The attendant whispered, "Would you like to file a report?" I smiled, slow and sharp. "No, dear, I'll file something better." Because what they didn't know, the account for their mortgage was still linked to my name. The house deed carried my signature, and every lie they told today had been funded by my trust. By the time they realized what I'd done, the flight they faked would be the least of their regrets. Stay till the end. You'll see why that boarding pass became their ticket to ruin. The taxi ride back from the airport felt longer than it should have. The city blurred past. Soft lights, louder lies. I didn't cry. I don't cry when I'm angry. I notice. The things people miss when they think you're broken, those are the things that save you. When I reached home, my key didn't fit. It hesitated halfway in the lock, like even the door was deciding whose side it was on. I knocked. Once. No answer. Through the frosted glass, I saw movement. Quick, guilty. Then her voice. "Lauren, my daughter-in-law." "Who is it?" She sounded nervous, not surprised. "It's me," I said. "The woman who owns this house." The door opened slow, an act of reluctance dressed as welcome. "Oh, Mom, you're back early." Her smile stretched, thin and cracking at the corners. "I never left," I said, stepping inside. Her perfume filled the hall, expensive, invasive, like she'd been redecorating with scent. The living room was spotless, unnaturally so. New vase, new cushions, old photos gone. Even my late husband's portrait, replaced with something abstract, meaningless. "Where's Daniel?" I asked. "Out, errands." Her tone clipped, defensive. "He thought you'd already left." Of course he did. I sat down slowly. The seat was warm. Someone had just been there. Probably her, probably him. On the table, I saw mail stacked in perfect symmetry. Bills, letters. One envelope caught my eye. My name, but the handwriting wasn't mine. Return address, Elderwell Care Facility. I looked at it for a moment, then slid it into my purse. Lauren noticed. Her eyes flickered. Quick, sharp, almost fearful. "Mom," she said, "you must be tired. I'll make you tea." "Tea?" Always tea when people need time to think. While she busied herself in the kitchen, I glanced around again. My things were missing. Not all. Just the pieces that carried history. My jewelry box, the porcelain swan Daniel made in second grade, my husband's fountain pen, gone, like they'd been carefully erased. The kettle hissed. Steam rose. She brought me a cup, smiling too wide. "Chamomile," she said. "Good for nerves." I took it, held it, didn't drink. "Lauren," I said softly, "how long have you been planning this?" Her hand froze on the counter. She turned, forcing a laugh. "Planning what?" "That flight, the fake booking, the little note from the care facility." I spoke gently, because real fear doesn't need volume. She tried to meet my gaze, failed halfway. "You must be confused." "I was," I said, "but confusion doesn't last as long as guilt." The room went quiet, just the clock ticking, counting every truth she refused to speak. Daniel came home 20 minutes later. His shoes clicked against the tiles like a confession. "Mom," he said, half surprised, half trapped, "you didn't tell me you were coming back." "I didn't know I was leaving," I replied. He exhaled, that deep, heavy sigh of someone about to lie. "Look, it's all a misunderstanding. The airline messed up." "Did they also mess up the locks?" I asked. His silence answered. Lauren stepped closer, touching his arm. Her comfort was rehearsed. "Daniel," she whispered, "just explain." He looked at me, and for a moment I saw the boy I raised, before he'd learned how to calculate affection. "Mom, you've been forgetting things lately," he began. "We were just worried." I cut him off. Worried enough to fake a flight or to pack my things while I was gone? The teacup rattled when I set it down. The sound made him flinch. Lauren jumped in. "You're overreacting. We wanted what's best for you." "What's best for me," I said, leaning back, "usually doesn't start with fraud." Daniel's eyes darkened. "You always think the worst of us." I smiled. "Not always. Sometimes I let you prove it." The words landed heavier than I expected. His jaw tightened. He turned away first. That told me everything. They'd built a story without me in it, and for a while, they thought it would hold. After he went upstairs, Lauren cleared the table, pretending calm. Her hands shook, just enough for me to notice. "Good night, Mom," she said. "We'll talk in the morning." "Of course," I murmured. Morning always brings clarity. When they were gone, I poured the tea down the sink. Then I opened the letter. "Dear Ms. Donovan, we're confirming your room reservation for November 3rd. As discussed with your son, all arrangements have been prepaid under his authorization. I read it twice, slow, so they'd already moved the pieces. They thought I'd be too gentle to move mine. But gentleness is a weapon when you know how to use it." I sat in the dark, the letter in one hand, my phone in the other. No calls, no messages, just silence, but the kind that hums before thunder. That was my "I realized" moment. Not that they betrayed me. I'd seen that coming, but that they thought I wouldn't fight back. I smiled to myself, folded the letter neatly, and placed it inside the velvet box that once held my wedding ring. That's when I decided something simple. I wasn't going to confront them. I was going to watch, and when I moved, it would be quiet and final. The morning after was painted in politeness. Lauren greeted me with toast, fruit, and a smile too precise to be human. Daniel sat across the table, scrolling through his phone like it held forgiveness. "Sleep well?" he asked, not looking up. "Like someone whose ticket vanished," I said. He chuckled tight. "Still on that, huh?" I spread marmalade across my toast. "Oh, I never leave loose ends. They trip people." Lauren's spoon clinked against her cup. A small, nervous symphony. I watched them move through the kitchen like a performance they'd practiced. She touched his arm. He smiled on cue. They avoided eye contact with me. And in between those gestures, I started seeing the fractures, the half-whispered words when they thought I couldn't hear, the drawer that used to hold my checkbook, now empty, the faint smell of paint in my study, fresh, hurried. After breakfast, Daniel left for work, or so he said. Lauren stayed behind, rearranging flowers that didn't need rearranging. "Big plans today?" she asked, too casually. "I thought I'd visit the bank," I said. "Check some things." Her hands froze mid-bloom. "Oh, you don't have to worry about that, Mom. Daniel already handles everything," I finished for her. "Yes, I've noticed." Our eyes met. Hers flickered first. It was small, but telling. Guilt always blinks. She forced a laugh. "You really don't trust us?" "I used to," I said softly. "But trust, like money, has to be earned and accounted for." That ended the conversation. She left the room soon after, pretending to tidy, but I could feel her watching from the hall mirror, making sure I didn't go upstairs. When she stepped out to meet a friend later, I did exactly that. The study smelled faintly of lavender and deceit. My old desk was gone, replaced with a sleeker one. New drawers, new locks. But people who replace things forget that ghosts linger. Behind the curtain rod, taped where only habit would remember, I found the envelope I'd kept since my husband's death. The property deeds, account statements, and insurance documents. They were still there, untouched. But one paper, the living trust, had been replaced with a photocopy, a forged signature. Mine. I held it up to the light. Perfect penmanship, wrong pen pressure. Daniel had always pressed too hard when writing, a habit I'd scolded him for as a boy. Funny how lessons come back when they're least wanted. The sound of the garage door jolted me. He was home early. I folded the papers, slid them into my sweater, and went downstairs just in time to see him walk in. "Bank closed early," he said. "Banks don't close at 10 a.m., I replied. He smiled, that same boyish grin he used to charm teachers. "You always were sharp, Ma." "Sharp enough to cut through lies," I said quietly. He walked closer, voice dropping. "Why are you looking through old papers?" "I was checking what's still mine," I said. "Turns out, not much." He exhaled through his nose, a warning more than a sigh. "Stop digging. You'll just make things harder." "For who?" I asked. He didn't answer, just left the room. And that was when I knew. The son I raised wasn't lost. He'd been traded. That evening, Lauren cooked my favorite meal. Chicken almondine, light on salt. A peace offering disguised as dinner. She served it with wine. I declined. Old women have instincts. They laughed together over dessert, too loud, too synchronized, and I sat there smiling, memorizing the choreography of deceit. The next day, while they were gone, I started small, checking bank balances, locked, calling my lawyer, voicemail full. Even the car, scheduled for servicing under Daniel's name. Control. They'd stripped it from me piece by piece like peeling paint. But here's the thing about paint. Scrape deep enough and the original color shows. That night, as I folded laundry in the quiet, my hands moving automatically, I whispered to the empty room, "I see you, Daniel. I see both of you." I placed his shirts neatly on the bed, one over the other, the way I used to when he was a child. But this time, it wasn't affection. It was ceremony, a reminder of what was mine and what would soon return to me, because every thread I folded carried a thought. You can fake tickets, you can forge papers, but you can't rewrite blood. When I turned off the light, I made my first quiet decision. Not to fight, not yet to watch, to let them think they'd won. Because arrogance always talks too much before it falls silent. And when it did, I would be ready. That's when I started watching. The days that followed moved with a strange rhythm, like a clock that kept perfect time but no longer measured truth. I stopped asking questions. I smiled when they lied. It's easier to move through a house of ghosts when you stop pretending they're alive. Lauren filled the silence with chatter. Pilates, parties, property upgrades. Daniel filled it with avoidance. They spoke around me, never to me, and I let them. Because sometimes distance isn't detachment. It's preparation. Every morning I poured tea. Jasmine, always. Same cup, same quiet ritual. The steam rising from that porcelain became my alibi. I could sit for hours, watching, thinking, planning while they believed I'd surrendered. "Mom, you should get out more," Lauren would say, her tone syrupy and barbed. "Oh, I do," I'd reply. "You just don't see where." She never asked where. That's the thing about people who think they're smarter. They avoid answers that might humble them. At dinner, Daniel talked numbers, investments. His voice, careful, professional. He forgot I'd taught him how compound interest worked and how manipulation compounds faster. One night, I overheard them in the study, Lauren whispering, "She's on to us." Daniel's reply, low and tired, "She can't prove anything." He was right. I couldn't. Not yet. But proof isn't power. Patience is. I began noticing patterns. The phone calls that stopped when I entered the room, the envelopes addressed to them both, from banks I'd never heard of, the way Daniel avoided touching me, like guilt might be contagious. I wrote nothing down. I kept everything in memory. The one thing they couldn't erase or forge. One evening, I set 2 cups of tea on the table. Daniel looked surprised. "You made me tea?" "No," I said, sliding it toward him. "I made you a test." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just drink it," I said softly. He didn't. He never liked what he couldn't control. He walked away instead, muttering something about paranoia. When he was gone, I sipped from both cups, just to remind myself how fear tastes when it's not mine. That night, I stood by the window, watching the reflection of their bedroom lights flicker across the lawn. 2 silhouettes moved, one restless, one still. Arguments blurred by glass and distance. She spoke in quick, slicing tones. He sat head in hands. That's when I stopped feeling sorry for myself, or for him. Pity is a leash, and they'd tugged on it long enough. The next morning, I found a message on my phone. Blocked number. "Mrs. Donovan, this is Mrs. Barlow from Elderwell. Your son canceled your room reservation. Would you like to confirm that?" I stared at the text for a long moment, the words dissolving into something larger. He hadn't just planned my removal. He'd erased my existence. The tea kettle whistled behind me. Shrill and relentless. I turned it off, poured the hot water into my cup. The reflection on the surface trembled, like my life had. But I didn't. I whispered to that reflection, "You picked the wrong woman to disappear." From that day on, my voice softened, my steps slowed, and my silence deepened. Because real revenge doesn't arrive screaming, it arrives sipping tea. Every act of kindness became strategy, every calm smile a rehearsal for justice. I folded Daniel's laundry the next afternoon, crisp lines, perfect edges. On top of his shirts, I placed a single envelope, empty. When he asked what it was, I said, "A reminder of what you left me with." He laughed, uncertain, uneasy. I smiled, certain, unshakable. That's when the distance became more than survival. It became control, because love had turned into observation. And observation into power. Rain came that night, hard enough to make the gutters confess. I sat by the window with my tea, listening. Storms have always been honest. They don't pretend to be anything but what they are. Daniel and Lauren were in the study again. Their whispers slid through the vents, paper-thin secrets in expensive air. I didn't strain to hear. I simply listened the way mothers do, catching the truth between breaths. "She won't last here much longer," Lauren said. "Just a few more weeks, then the transfer clears." Daniel's voice. Transfer. The word thudded like a nail in wood. I stood, slow, careful, and walked to the back hallway, the one that curved behind the study. The door there had an old vent grate near the floor, left from when the house still had oil heat. I knelt, the wood cold under my knees, and watched. Lauren held a stack of documents. Daniel was signing. Every stroke of his pen cut deeper than any knife could. "Once this goes through, she can't touch a cent," Lauren said. "She'll be in Elderwell, comfortable, quiet, out of the picture." He nodded. "She'll thank us one day." I smiled in the dark. Funny, the lies people tell to justify theft. When they left the room, I slipped inside. The smell of his cologne clung to the air, familiar, foreign. On the desk lay the folder. I didn't hesitate. Inside, a transfer of power of attorney, my signature forged again. A sale agreement for the house, and at the bottom, a confirmation of wire transfer, to her name only. I felt nothing. No tears, no tremor, just a steady pulse of awareness, the kind that precedes storms. Then I saw it. The phone. Still recording. They'd been recording each conversation, every call with the lawyer. I pressed play. Lauren's voice. She'll never see it coming. She trusts you too much. Daniel. She's my mother, Lauren. Lauren. Exactly. That's what makes it easy. Click. Silence. I stood there for a moment, staring at the little red light still blinking at the corner of the screen. Proof, glowing quietly in the dark. I could have called the police, the lawyer, the world. But justice that arrives too soon teaches nothing. Instead, I copied the files to my drive, took photos of every page, and placed everything back exactly as I'd found it. When Daniel returned an hour later, I was sitting by the fire, reading. He stopped in the doorway, eyes narrowing. "You're still up?" "I couldn't sleep," I said, turning a page. "Storms keep me awake." He glanced toward the study, checking, confirming, then smiled. "Don't worry, Ma, everything's under control." "Yes," I murmured. "That's what storms say before they break." The next morning, I went to the garden. The soil smelled of rain and endings. I dug near the rose bush, the one Daniel planted as a boy, and buried a flash drive there, sealed in a small tin. Some people plant flowers. I plant insurance. That afternoon, the lawyer called. Not mine, theirs. He sounded polite, cautious. "Mrs. Donovan, I just wanted to confirm you're aware of the property transfer." "Oh, I'm aware," I said, voice like glass. "But tell me, do forged signatures hold up well under court lighting?" Silence, then a nervous laugh. I'm sure there's been some mix-up." "There has," I cut in. "And you're standing in the middle of it." I ended the call. By evening, Daniel came home early, face pale. "Mom, we need to talk." "Yes," I said, "we do." He sat across from me, restless. "Lauren said you've been snooping." "I prefer noticing." He rubbed his temples. "You don't understand how complicated things are." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, setting my tea down. "You wanted freedom. You just didn't want to earn it." He looked up then, startled by my calm. That's when I knew he felt it. The shift, the end of his advantage. "Mom, please, you're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I said, "you are." He left without another word, but in his eyes I saw the first flicker of doubt, the kind that grows into fear. When the door closed behind him, I opened my notebook, not to write, but to draw. A simple diagram, them, plan, proof, exposure, and under it, one line, not yet. That night, the rain stopped. The house went still, and I made my vow, not whispered, not prayed, just promised in silence. They built a world on my name. I'll make sure it collapses with theirs still written on it. I folded the page, slipped it inside the velvet box with the first letter, and closed it with the same quiet satisfaction as turning a key. The decision was complete. Not rage, not justice, something colder and far more patient. Because revenge, when crafted by a mother, doesn't roar. It waits, and when it moves, it changes the weather. The house grew heavier after that night, like it had started keeping its own secrets. I stopped turning on the hallway lights. Shadows told me more than faces did. Each morning I brewed my tea, jasmine and patience, and waited for the next clue to surface. They thought the silence meant surrender. They didn't notice it was surveillance. 2 days later, an email arrived from an unknown sender. Subject line, "Still your account?" Inside was a single attachment, a PDF of my signature from the original trust, dated years ago. No name, no note. Just a quiet warning. I printed it, folded it, slipped it into the velvet box, and replied with one sentence. "Whoever you are, keep watching." Because allies appear in strange forms when greed grows too loud. That evening, I went to the local grocer. While Lauren thought I was comparing fruit prices, I was planting conversation. "Is Mr. Hale still at the downtown bank?" I asked casually. The cashier nodded. "He says he misses your cookies." I smiled. "Tell him I might bring a batch soon." Bring cookies had always been our code for bring documents. Within a week, a sealed envelope appeared on my porch inside a grocery bag. Account statements, transfers, signatures, all trails leading straight to Daniel and Lauren. Proof dusted in sugar. At church that Sunday, Mrs. Ferguson mentioned that Lauren still owed her 2 months' pay. "Left with my client list," she said, shaking her head. So it wasn't a single betrayal, it was a pattern. And patterns, once mapped, become leverage. I asked for a copy of her complaint. She hesitated, then handed it over. "Why?" she asked. "Because," I said, "sometimes the hands they step on still remember how to grip." That night, I slipped into the study. The air smelled of their perfume and fear. I planted my own recorder behind the lamp and let it listen. Over the next days, I gathered fragments. Lauren boasting to her friend, Daniel's assurances, talk of final transfers, each word another nail. Then I began leaving crumbs of my own. A note on the fridge, meeting with attorney 3 p.m. A staged phone call loud enough for Lauren to hear, "Yes, I found the documents, original signatures intact." By morning, Daniel's tone shifted. He followed me from room to room, asking gentle, useless questions. "Everything okay, Ma? You seem distracted." "Not at all," I said, sipping tea. "I've never been clearer." He smiled, but his eyes betrayed panic, the moment when a hunter realizes the animal has been watching back. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed. Same unknown number. A new message. "They've moved your husband's retirement fund. Check account ending 74201. That account was sacred." My husband's last gift. I logged in, empty. So I called the number. A calm male voice answered, familiar somehow. "Mrs. Donovan, this is Gerald Hale, the grocer's brother, the banker. I can help," he said, "but you'll need to act before they realize I've frozen everything." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled, slow, deliberate. Not relief, readiness. That night, I baked cookies, real ones this time. The house filled with the smell of butter and deception. Lauren came down smiling. "Smells amazing, Mom." "It should," I said. "Old recipe. Family secret." She bit into one, pleased with herself, unaware that the bank would freeze every account under her name before dawn. The lawyer would receive anonymous copies of every forged document, and Daniel would wake to discover the ground beneath his lies, quietly sold back to me. Across the table, they laughed, planning their next step. I smiled, slow, steady, deliberate. The kind of smile that says only one thing: I'm ahead. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was already here, wearing pearls, sipping jasmine tea. By dawn the next morning, I was already awake. I watched the first light crawl across the curtains and thought how quiet exposure always is before it speaks. Downstairs, Lauren was pacing. She had the phone to her ear, whispering fast, sharp words. I caught fragments. "Bank freeze, no access. How?" I stirred my tea and listened. Every panic of hers sounded like music to me. When Daniel came down, he looked different. Hair uncombed, tie forgotten, eyes heavy with the knowledge that things no longer obeyed him. "Mom," he said, voice rough, "did you do something to the accounts?" I met his gaze. "I did something years ago, Daniel. I raised you to know better." He winced, as if the sentence itself left a mark. "This is serious." "So am I." I let him talk, excuses spilling like water through broken glass. "It's just a misunderstanding. Paperwork," Lauren said. "Stop." My voice cut through the room, soft but absolute. "You forged my name. You planned my removal. That isn't paperwork. That's intention." He opened his mouth, closed it again. The silence stretched until even the house seemed to hold its breath. I stood and walked toward the window. The reflection showed both of us, him behind me, guilt hanging from his shoulders like an ill-fitting coat. "When I was at the airport," I said, "I thought you wanted me gone. I didn't realize you wanted me erased." He took a step closer. "It was Lauren's idea." Of course. The oldest story in the world. a man choosing cowardice over conscience. I turned, calm, deliberate. Then you should probably call her down. We're going to talk like a family, one last time. Lauren appeared minutes later, lipstick perfect, composure cracked only at the edges. What's this about? About truth, I said, gesturing to the dining table. On it lay 3 items, a flash drive, a manila folder, and my phone. Daniel sat. Lauren didn't. Predators rarely sit when they sense traps. I started with the folder. These are bank statements, signed withdrawals, a transfer of my husband's fund to your joint account. Daniel swallowed hard. That can't be real, I finished for him. Ask Gerald Hale, he'll confirm. Her eyes flicked, the way a trapped animal's do before it bites. You went behind our backs. No, I said. I simply walked through the door you left open. I pressed play on the phone. The room filled with their own voices, the recording from the study, every syllable soaked in arrogance. She'll never see it coming. She trusts you too much. Lauren's face drained of color. Daniel's hands trembled. I let the silence afterward linger long enough for guilt to settle like dust. Then I smiled, slow and measured. Do you know what fascinates me most about betrayal? Neither spoke. It never survives daylight. I pushed the flash drive toward them. Everything you said, every document you signed, every call you made, it's all here. Copies are in 3 places. One with my lawyer, one with the bank, one with a friend who rather enjoys headlines. Lauren found her voice first. You wouldn't ruin your own son. I tilted my head. You already did. Daniel stood abruptly, pacing, desperate for a door that no longer existed. What do you want, Mom? Money? To humiliate us? No, I said. Just clarity. They didn't understand. They thought revenge was about fire. Mine was about reflection. You'll both sign papers returning what's mine, every account, every share, every property deed. Then you'll leave this house, quietly. Lauren laughed, brittle, defiant. And if we don't? I poured another cup of tea, the sound soft, almost tender. Then tomorrow morning, the world will know who you really are. Her bravado faltered. You're bluffing. Maybe, I said, but bluffs don't come with bank witnesses and digital timestamps. Daniel looked at his wife, then at me. Something in him collapsed. Maybe pride. Maybe the illusion of control. Give her the papers, he murmured. Lauren turned on him. You spineless? Enough, I said quietly. We're all done performing. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, heels slicing across the marble like accusations. The door slammed, her last attempt at power. Daniel stayed. He looked older suddenly, stripped of noise. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Meaning is measured by outcome, I said, not intention. He lowered his head. I just wanted freedom. You could have had it, I whispered, if you'd asked instead of taken. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he reached for the pen on the table, signed every page I placed before him. His hand shook the way it used to when he first learned to write his name. When it was over, I gathered the papers, slid them into the envelope, and said softly, Go. He hesitated at the doorway. Will I ever see you again? You will, I said, but not as the man who betrayed me. He nodded once, a broken gesture, and left. The house fell into a silence so deep it almost sounded holy. I stood there holding the papers, feeling the air shift. Justice hadn't arrived yet, but control had returned. And in that quiet, I realized something unexpected. Vengeance doesn't heal, but it restores balance. I placed the flash drive back in its velvet box beside the letter and the deed. My tea had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. Cold things have a way of reminding you what warmth costs. Upstairs, their room was still messy, full of things that no longer belonged to them. Perfume bottles, his jacket, her jewelry. I opened the window. The wind did the rest. By nightfall, the house was mine again, empty, peaceful, waiting. I sat by the fire watching the flames rebuild what deceit had burned and thought, the truth doesn't explode. It seeps, steady as smoke. Tomorrow would bring the public part of justice. Tonight belonged to silence, to tea, to a mother who had finally learned the difference between loving and saving. By morning, the story had already begun to move, not through newspapers or gossip, but through whispers, the kind that travel faster than proof. Lauren returned first. Her face was polished again, her tone carefully casual. "Daniel told me what happened," she said. "We can fix this." I was trimming roses in the garden. Their thorns had never seemed so honest. "Fix what?" I asked. "The misunderstanding," she said, smiling like diplomacy could still save her. "Lauren," I said softly, "you can't fix a mirror once you've thrown it." Her confidence faltered. "You don't have to do this. You'll ruin him." I clipped another stem. "I didn't ruin him. I raised him. You just rearranged the pieces." She took a step closer. "If you go public—" "I won't," I said. "Public humiliation is cheap. Private realization lasts longer." The silence between us thickened, sweet with fear. "You think you've won?" she whispered. "No," I said. "I've remembered." For a moment, something ugly flickered behind her eyes. "He'll come back to me," she said. "He might," I replied, "but not with anything left to give." I turned and walked back inside, leaving her there among the roses. By the time I reached the door, I heard the snap of a stem, the sound of something breaking twice. Daniel arrived later that day. No suit, no pretense. He stood at the threshold like a boy who'd come home after curfew. "I signed everything," he said. "The lawyer verified it." I nodded. "Good. I'm sorry, Mom." "Sorry is for accidents," I said. "You made choices." He looked at me, eyes wet, voice low. "I thought she loved me." "She did," I said, "the way fire loves wood." He tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "You always know how to make things sound poetic." "It's not poetry," I said. "It's accounting." He sat on the couch, staring at his hands. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "you live with the version of yourself you created. That's punishment enough." He nodded slowly. "And you? What will you do?" "Rebuild," I said, quietly, "the same way you destroyed." When he left, he didn't look back. That somehow hurt less than I expected. Later, I found Lauren's jewelry box on the dining table. Inside was a single note in her handwriting. "You'll regret this." I smiled. Regret was her language, not mine. I took the note outside, struck a match, and watched the flame catch. It burned too fast, leaving behind a curl of smoke that smelled faintly of her perfume. The air felt clean afterward. That evening, I sat by the window, the same place I'd once waited for their return. The garden shimmered under the fading sun. Somewhere in the distance, a car door closed. A life moved on. I poured one final cup of tea. Steady hands. No tremor left. Every betrayal has a sound when it ends. This one sounded like quiet breathing. I thought of my husband, of the boy Daniel once was, of all the ways love bends before it breaks. And I whispered, "Balance restored." No victory speeches. No grand finale. Just peace, earned, not granted. The world outside kept turning, unaware that inside this house, justice had already been served. The next morning, the house felt lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. For the first time in months, I made breakfast only for myself. Eggs, toast, tea, simple, deliberate. Freedom always tastes plain before it becomes sweet. The phone rang while I ate. It was my lawyer. "Mrs. Donovan," he said, "the bank confirmed full reinstatement. The deeds are back in your name." "Good," I said. "And the other matter?" He hesitated. "The anonymous file you sent, it's everywhere now. The board is reviewing Daniel's employment." I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the sunlight pouring through the window. It touched everything I'd reclaimed. The table, the china, the quiet. Lauren had been clever but not discreet. The recordings, the bank transfers, her messages, they'd spread like perfume in a small room. Every friend, every associate, every online forum where her name carried status, now whispered. I didn't need to lift a finger. The truth did the work. At noon, I went into town. People who once looked past me now nodded, cautious, respectful. Mrs. Ferguson from church pressed my hand. I heard, she whispered. Don't believe everything you hear, I said with a smile. Believe what stays silent after. I stopped at the florist, bought a single white orchid, and walked to the Elderwell Care Facility, the place they'd planned to send me. The receptionist recognized my name. Oh, Mrs. Donovan, we still have your reservation, but... I interrupted gently. Keep it, but not for me. She blinked, confused. There's a woman I know, I said, handing her a card. She's older, alone. Put it under her name instead. The receptionist nodded slowly, sensing something sacred in the gesture. Leaving the building, I felt the first real warmth of satisfaction. Revenge wasn't destruction, it was redirection. That evening, Daniel showed up again. Not in arrogance this time, but in ruin. His tie was gone, his voice cracked. Mom, he said, they fired me. I looked up from my book. For fraud? For everything, he whispered. Then they finally saw what I saw. He sat across from me. I don't know where to go. You have a home, I said, but not this one, not yet. He nodded. Lauren's gone, took what she could. She always would. For a long moment we sat in silence, the kind that exists between two people who finally ran out of pretense. Then I said, you'll rebuild, Daniel, but this time, brick by brick. And none of them mine. He left without anger, without excuses, just the hollow understanding that sometimes a mother's forgiveness is the one thing she saves for last. The next day, I visited the charity board my husband once chaired. They'd been struggling for years. I handed over a folder. This is the deed to the Donovan house, I said. Sell it. Use the money to rebuild the women's shelter downtown. The chairman's mouth fell open. Mrs. Donovan, that's justice, I said. Just quiet her. That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave, but to move on. I'd rented a cottage on the coast, nothing fancy, just enough space for peace and memory. Before I locked the door, I walked through the house one last time. The study, empty. The kitchen, clean. The garden, still blooming, even the roses Lauren had trampled. I touched the velvet box one last time, opened it, and took out the folded note I'd written the night I made my vow. I read it again. They built a world on my name. I'll make sure it collapses with theirs still written on it. It had. But I'd done it without rage. Only clarity. Before leaving, I placed a single white orchid on the windowsill. My husband loved those. They bloom in silence, steady and proud. As I closed the door, I whispered, for every mother who ever trusted too much, this one was for you. Outside, the wind was soft, almost forgiving. I walked down the street without looking back. Behind me, the house stood calm, empty, reclaimed, clean. Ahead, the world stretched wide, quiet, vast, waiting. Revenge was never the point. Balance was. And balance, once restored, doesn't need applause. It just needs peace. The cottage smelled of salt and wood polish, a clean kind of silence. Mornings came slower there, without footsteps or apologies. I woke before sunrise, the way I used to when Daniel was little, and brewed jasmine tea in a chipped porcelain cup. The same kind I'd held through every lie, every quiet war. Only now the steam didn't tremble. I did not need to listen for doors opening or voices rehearsing concern. The only sound was the kettle cooling on the stove and gulls arguing outside. The past few weeks had unfolded like a closing book. The charity had sold the house. The women's shelter began reconstruction. My name no longer felt heavy. It finally belonged to me again. Sometimes the phone rang, Daniel's number. I never answered, but I always let it ring once longer than I needed to. A small mercy. I spent afternoons writing letters I would never send. To my husband, to the girl I'd been before motherhood, to the son I might still forgive someday. Each ended the same way. It's possible to love someone and still lock the door behind them. One evening, I sat on the porch as the tide receded. The air smelled faintly of rain. In the fading light, my reflection in the teacup looked calm, almost younger. I realized then that revenge hadn't changed me. It had returned me to myself. I didn't need anyone to know what I'd done. The beauty of quiet justice is that it leaves no echo, only balance. When the first star appeared, I whispered, "All debts settled." The sea answered in small, steady waves. Inside, I placed the velvet box on the mantel, the letter, the flash drive, the old key. They belonged there now, not as weapons, but as witnesses. Proof that even the softest hands can rebuild after betrayal. Before bed, I poured the last of the tea into the sink. Watching the pale stream swirl away, I felt no loss, only release. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It walks in barefoot, quiet, and stays. 5 years later, I returned to the city for the first time. The streets had changed, new cafes, louder lights, but time had softened the memory of betrayal into something almost gentle. The women's shelter stood tall now, glass and brick where my house once stood. Inside, laughter echoed in the halls, steady, unafraid. I walked through slowly, tracing my fingers along the wall where my old fireplace might have been. A young woman approached me, clipboard in hand. "Are you Mrs. Donovan?" she asked. "I was," I said. "Now I'm just May." She smiled. "You started all this. You changed lives." I shook my head. "I only redirected one." She didn't understand, but that was all right. Some stories are meant to be carried quietly. Later, I sat by the courtyard fountain, sipping jasmine tea from a paper cup. The steam rose, curling like memory. A child ran past, laughing. Somewhere nearby, a mother called after him, voice warm, full of patience. I thought of Daniel. We hadn't spoken in years, but every Christmas a card arrived. No apologies, just 2 words, "Still learning." That was enough. The sun dipped lower, casting gold on the water. I whispered to the reflection, sometimes being left behind is the fastest way to get ahead, because being left at an airport, a doorstep, or a lie isn't an ending. It's an invitation to rebuild stronger, quieter, wiser. I finished my tea, stood, and walked toward the city lights, unhurried. Every step felt lighter, every breath mine again. And if anyone ever asks what happened, I'll tell them this much. I boarded no plane, but I still arrived where I needed to be. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. And if you've ever trusted the wrong people, this story was for you. And if this story found you when you needed strength, hit like, share it with someone who's healing, and subscribe for more stories that remind you, the quiet ones always rise last.